Locations are obviously like absolutely critical in any film, but especially in ours, they had to be period accurate, and there weren't many more important locations than Steve's home, which in the original short was my great aunt's house, which was like this time capsule.
It was great.
It was on an estate. It was small. It was cozy. It was absolutely perfect. But we weren't able to use it this time around, which meant we had to source a new location, and we had to find that quite late in the day. I ended up going on Rightmove and just spending hours just looking for the right thing. We were able to narrow it down to a couple of contenders, and we ended up going with one that was actually really close to our main base.
The location was in Stockwood.
Yes.
The base was in Whitchurch.
Yes.
So like very close, basically.
5-minute drive, if
Basically,
that. It changed the story a little bit, I'd say, this location. In a way, it was too good. It was too nice, in a way. Like, it was much nicer than what was intended in the story, which completely changed the way we'd envisioned it and the blocking that we might have had in mind and the way you thought you might light it.
Yeah.
So it was a real challenge. We did go to the location ourselves and had a little sit down in the space. It's very green.
It was very green. It had
Original
an
one was
amazing
brown.
carpet. It was just
We got one shot.
quintessential like 70s, 80s decor, wasn't it? Because I think the idea was that it was always going to be more of a, I remember you saying like more of a late 70s film
That's how it should
rather
feel.
than an 80s movie. Like,
Yeah.
'cause that's how stuff was, you know?
Yeah,
It was
like
just
it
coming
hasn't-
out of the 80s and moving in, out
Yeah.
of the 70s and moving into the 80s.
Yeah, of course. And not everyone's just going to have the newest stuff. Things need to feel lived in.
The space worked. I think that there was a bit of pressure to make it feel a bit smaller as a space rather than, because it actually was quite big. There were parts of the room that we deliberately tried to frame out. I don't know if that really made that much of a difference, if I'm being honest, and maybe made it more challenging for us to work. But I think that Graham's got to sit somewhere. And
There's a point, because there's a reason like big budgets they like to build their sets inside studios, because trying to get 30 people in any domestic house that isn't a mansion is a bit of a mission.
yeah, there's some funny stuff in the back garden, because obviously the crew was based in the front and back garden, because it was kind of the only space we had. We had to either be outside or you had to be tucked away upstairs, because you couldn't, on the ground floor, you couldn't move for kit and people.
We put the monitor in the kitchen.
Yeah, so you were in the kitchen and then the rest of the crew was kind of outside the house. And of course you're at the mercy of the public still, even though you're inside. When we were scouting that location, there was like these guys next door were like coming in with tools and like started like banging about inside the house, and they were doing some renovations and stuff, and we were like, man, like I think this could be a problem. And we were like asked them like how long you're going to be, when you're going to be doing the work, and they were like, oh, we're going to be all next week. And
It's like exactly
when
we were filming.
shooting. So
I think they had a digger in the garden, right? And they were
Bringing the
like,
rock.
they were like building an extension in the garden, so they were digging foundations, and literally, I think the digger was making like the house shake.
We were like trying to like plan and block stuff in there the week before, and we were like shaking around,
Things falling off tables and stuff.
trying to speak, and someone was like hammering away.
I think we had to chuck them a couple $100 to get them to put the tools down. on the
Yeah,
day.
I think Guy did bribe them. Yes,
Yeah.
big time.
Sally Phillips turns up. This is the first time either of us had actually met her. As mentioned, we did so much of this project ourselves. We were running around like headless chickens, fixing this and fixing that, which meant that I missed her on the costume fitting day and didn't have time to talk to her on the phone prior. So when she turned up on the shoot that day, that was the first time I'd met her, the first time I'd spoken to her. And it was challenging to get going from a completely cold start. It's not the way you want it to be. Like ideally you would have rehearsals. You'd at least maybe talk on the phone about some ideas, but
I guess because immediately we just got to get cracking on the day, and there isn't time to really talk about any kind of backstory or
How to play
it's just straight in with almost where she's standing, where she's sitting. What scene was it that you did initially?
Was the first scene we did with her the one where it's actually Steve is at night?
It's at night, that's it.
And that's one of my favourite scenes in the film. And that was shot during the day, so you had to like black out the back garden, if I remember correctly. Because we hadn't talked about it, it was like we didn't really know the inner workings of like what kind of mum is she and how on top of like her son's like behaviour is she. So I think she wanted to play it initially like slightly more intensely, where my idea for that scene was that the mum is trying to make conversation with her son, and it's a little bit tricky. Like, she's not keen on him having a motorbike, but she wants to have something to talk to him about. So she asks him, like, she says, you can get to work, at least you can get to work faster now because you've got your bike, can't you? Even though she hates the thing, she's trying to make conversation. And I always wanted that to happen at a distance, like she's sort of tentative about it.
Yeah.
But I remember Sally being quite keen to come into the kitchen quite quickly and be quite upbeat about it, and kind of be either sit down with Steve or be right next to him, and things that you would rather work out, you'd much rather work out in like pre-production and rehearsals than have to be dealing with that on the day. So we just had to kind of nail down like who Sharon Knight was in a very, very tiny amount of time. I think she was there 2 days.
Yeah, I don't think she was around for the majority of that day, wasn't she? Didn't she come in the evening when we were like just going into the scene?
Yeah, and then was the Gibbsy stuff the following day?
I think it was the following day, yeah.
So yeah, that was our initial challenge, was just trying to get up to speed quicker than I'd had to get up to speed with any other actor or actress, and obviously with her being one of the more sort of familiar faces. It just kind of exaggerated how not ideal it was. But we powered through. You know, I sort of like had a word with her at lunch and said, like, you know, I'm kind of just this young guy. I know nothing, and I'm, you know, please help me. Like, there are some gaps that I really, you know, I sort of need you to help me fill here. And she was just like, she was like, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be good. We're gonna do it. It's gonna be fine. And I was like, oh, yes. It's going to be fun. Nailed everything all day today. You can get one line wrong. Can't go around all the other ones.
Do you want to sneak in now, or do we clap her off first?
We're done.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a camera wrap for Sally. We have some photos and some ADR, but that's it for her. Thank you very much.
Woo!
Yeah, that's him.
Nice set, nice costume. It's like one of those scenes which I do think is firing on many cylinders. Like, it's funny, it's dynamic. Even though most of the characters are sat, like, it feels quite energetic. And the introduction to that's really fun when Gibbsy shows up.
It is, yeah. I think that it's something that we talked about a lot anyway. Like, that scene and how it would play out, and like the little moments, like the pots and pans smashing in the background when Gibbsy swears. And
You what? Shut your fucking mouth, Dave!
Yeah.
little bits like that.
You don't want to pick too many favourites with the scenes. Obviously, they're all important, but there's always like standout moments where you're like, if we're gonna get something really right, like, it should be this. Like, this is one of those scenes where if this is great, it's one of those scenes where people will leave the cinema remembering that moment.
Yeah.
Some sunglasses you weren't a fan of?
The orange sunglasses, yeah, they look great. Hey, they look great.
Thanks, Jess.
But yeah, man.
Reflection.
I think it was particularly when he was standing up and talking to Andy. I was quite happy with how that looked, and then like soon as the glasses got in, I was like, oh no.
Because he just stands up and you can see the honeycomb
light just there. Because it was so late in the day, I think I sacked off that light, I remember, and just used whatever was coming through the window. And you still see the window reflected, but it's fine because it's just a window. But there wasn't really any time to fix it, or like, I didn't want to run the risk of having to keep redoing it, like, because this stupid light is reflecting like every so often, and then that becomes a problem. So yeah, I don't know, it compromised the lighting, but I think it's better to keep that flow going.
Absolutely.
Because I think that certainly, I think the week before there were moments where slight lighting tweaks or things would just break the flow a little bit. So I was a little more conscious of that at that point.
It's interesting how Steve, the main character, kind of takes like a major back seat in that scene. It's like kind of blink and you miss him. You forget he's even there. But if you watch it closely, Dave is doing a lot of acting. He's reacting to the ridiculousness of this whole scenario really well.
That, and also the scene at the school, I think, could have been scenes where maybe it would have benefited from a bit of coverage on Steve.
Yeah, because he's
just
at the back, isn't he?
Yeah, because there are some great bits of performance, and you know, there's like an impatience about him that you miss maybe in the school bit, because it's become so much about Ice Cream Mike and Richie, who are like these two big characters, and then you just sort of miss the context of what's going on.
I think that's like, it's sort of a general thing across the whole shoot, is that we were moving at such a rapid pace. We had so much to cover. Like, it's such an ambitious film for us. You do really well to not lose out on too much detail, and you just think if you had a little bit more time, a little bit more money, you would just experience. If we had a continuity, if we had a bloody script supervisor, then they'd say, wouldn't it be nice if you just grabbed a couple of shots of Steve?
Yeah, they would certainly do that. And Guy, to an extent, definitely stepped in that role. I think that towards the end of the shoot, we were certainly being more efficient with like the coverage we were choosing, which enabled to then get some bonus stuff. Whereas like, we weren't necessarily starting in the right place, or...
Well, we work ourselves into corners quite a lot, because we planned shots that were really good, but they were on like, they were usually on a track or something like that, and we would try and hoover up a lot of shots in that track. But it's sort of the pros of that is you get a nice shot which does a lot of coverage, but the con is that it's quite tricky to get out of it. It's quite difficult to then have enough time to get the little bits of detail that you want in and around that.
Yeah, I think so. I think that the scene up on the street with Dennis was a good example of where starting to get it right, where it is starting with that track, because it helped us get into a lot of scenes like with the school, where you know it starts on the move, brings you in. I think the idea is right. I don't think necessarily the execution is perfect. I think that's a lot to do with it being so early in the shoot, and there's just a lot to figure out. Whereas I think later on, we started to embrace it better. I don't know.
Yeah, no, nice.
And that's why I think I should play Steve and you should play Dennis.
Yeah.
In conclusion.
In conclusion.
Anyway, we should probably do that.
Thank you for watching this video. We are hopefully going to be putting these out on a fairly regular basis, so do keep an eye out on the socials. Please do consider buying or renting the film. You can find out all the information you need on the fencefilm.co.uk.
Hold on.
There it is. The finished article.